Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was recently created by Tom on the Death Valley National Park workshop. Tom is shooting with a Nikon D200 camera body, an effective focal length of 19 millimeters. Exposure trio is ISO 100 f9 and 7/10 of a second. Right away I like Tom's camera position. To me this is a great example of extraordinary camera position. Tom has gotten very close to the first subject of his image, his foreground of the dramatic salt pan at Badwater in Death Valley National Park. He's gotten very close by getting extremely low. For me as the viewer, it makes the texture in the salt evaporation pan very palpable. I feel like I can reach out and touch it. It makes the leading line of the salt evaporation pattern here very palpable in terms of pulling me into the image, making me feel like I can walk right in. Tom is shooting a traditional subject, a beautiful landscape in a traditional way, wide angle lens and lots of depth of field, and in that context I'm enjoying classical balance. Get a real strong sense of this line, one of the major subjects in the foreground of the image, almost perfectly rhyming the length and quality of line of the Funeral Mountains coming down to the salt pan. Not only that, they're co-balancing each other along a diagonal in the image, which has a very strong unifying effect. So another line down in here in the foreground does a beautiful job of rhyming the distance and quality and direction of line of the Panamint Mountains. And these two lines combined carve out a negative space shape here that beautifully balances with the negative space of the sky. On the sides of the image you also have some strong contrast that carves out negative space that's nicely balancing back and forth in the image. Another thing that I'm enjoying in the image is the fact that even though there's a lot of balance, there's still a strong sense of the dynamic playing out in terms of the way the subjects are relating to each other. This very heavy wedge of black is pretty much the only place in the image that doesn't have a pretty strong sense of color when you first look at the image. It's also obviously very, very high contrast. This is a great example of leveraging how a very small area of an image, because it has an enormous amount of visual weight, could in a dynamic way balance everything else. One other thing I think is totally worth mentioning here is that even though Tom doesn't have any clouds, there's still a lot of dynamic movement in the sky based on color. Just really encourage you as a landscape photographer on very clear days to get there earlier than you typically would and look for dramatic gradients of color in blank skies that can help to move the eye and keep these areas from getting so flat in your composition. Think about perfect world variation. Just a couple of things that I want to do to the image. One of the things that I'd like to do is deal with this vignetting in the corners. It doesn't look like post-processing vignetting. It looks like something unnatural that may have come from a filter holder. It's very abrupt. I'd like to get rid of that and play around with the idea of color balance in the image. I'm working in Adobe Photoshop CS5, and like a lot of people have talked about, one of the nice features of CS5 is the new content aware feature, and we could potentially, in addition to a lot of other ways of dealing with this, use that here to get rid of these vignetted corners. I'm going to copy my background, simple selection tool, the marquee tool I got there by hitting the M key. Content aware, when we're going to do what we're going to do here, which is make a selection and fill the selection, a lot of times it's going to work the best when we give Photoshop a pretty decent area of information to consider in terms of doing this work. So I'm going to make a selection like this, a good bit bigger than the vignette itself. I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and now in this drop down menu I'm going to have a choice to do content aware. I'm going to hit OK. Photoshop is going to do the work, and then I'm going to drop the selection, Command D on a Mac, Control D on a PC, add a layer mask, and then only use part of that, just the part in the corner, to blend in, although it's done a pretty good job without even using the layer mask. I did the same thing in the other corner. I've already done that work, and here are the two layers with layer mask where I did the work, using that technique to essentially heal those corners. The next work that I did was a series of moves to essentially affect color balance in the image so that there's more of a feeling of color movement. Right now there's quite a bit of magenta everywhere in the image. It's in the orange. It's pretty easy if you look at the difference between this area of the background and the salt pan to see it in the highlights and the salt, and pretty easy to see it in the blue here. This is not a classical blue. It's a blue that has been warmed up quite a bit by magenta, so this is pushing more towards the idea of blue-violet. I want to make some changes so that we create a variation where there's a little bit more of a feeling of color separation. At the same time, I'm going to create just a little bit more of a low end here to create a greater feeling of depth or modeling in this subject as a leading line. And there is the work that I did. Two different variations of the image. One pushes more towards each of these zones of the image being color specific, and the other is tied together by the idea of magenta. And in my version, there's a little bit more form in terms of the leading line in the foreground because of low end that I've added to the image. I like both of these variations for different reasons. Would love to hear your feedback about all the work that we've done today. Tom started off with a really stunning image here of Badwater in Death Valley National Park. I love his camera position. I love the simplicity. I love the balancing elements, and I love the fact that even though he has a blank sky, there's still really beautiful movement in that area of the image. Big thank you to Tom for sharing this image with us. Big thank you to you for being here. I hope to see you again real soon on another episode of the Daily Critique.